Now, what makes a city great? This is one of the questions that we're constantly talking about, I feel. It's obviously all the big buildings and stuff, but it's also the spaces that we can enjoy either as leisure or because we're walking through them doing our daily activities. The New South Wales Landscape Architecture Awards have just been announced, and today we're going to hear about some of the winners, why they work, what was involved in getting them up. Sara Padgett Kjaersgaard is with us. She's a landscape architect, and lecturer in landscape architecture at the University of New South Wales, and she was the jury chair for this year's awards, and she's with us now. Good morning to you, Sara.
Good morning, Cassie, and good morning to your listeners.
Now, tell me, firstly, what is landscape architecture?
Well, landscape architecture is a profession that marries what we'd like to say art and science. It's about designing spaces for people and all species, and it's anything from your backyard to your local park to urban plazas like Darling Square to city shaping projects like the light rail or the metro or even our Olympic parklands.
Okay, so it doesn't necessarily have to have nature in it in that case.
Well, I think nature is subliminal. It can be the way water flows through an area, the way that trees are interconnected, the way that smaller species like insects might actually be part of the project site that you're working on. So I think nature is everywhere, but we're trying to make sure that the ecological systems and the social people systems all work within our outdoor spaces.
Mm-hmm. So give us a idea of the scale of the industry. Like how many landscape architects might there be in the country, and who employs them?
Yeah, that's a great question. We have 4,000 landscape architect members of the Institute of Landscape Architects, and one of the biggest growing sectors for landscape architecture in Australia is actually local government. So lots of local governments are using landscape architects to design streetscapes, to design local urban parks, and even to work on planning and management documents in those local areas.
And so they'd be guided by ideas of civic harmony and making spaces for us all to share.
That's correct, and a big part of the work we do is community consultation and really just ensuring that community is on board for the beginning of a project so that the end user is really feeling that they're part of what is making this place great.
And what about the private sector? I guess, if you're got a bit of cash and you're going to build or redesign a big house, you might employ a landscape architect?
Absolutely. Landscape architects can add value for private residences. Even we see a lot of apartment buildings. So some of the award winners this year were doing rooftop gardens on new apartment complexes, and that's about providing spaces for food production, again, insects and pollinators, and just delightful spaces for family units and the growing demand for higher density housing, for example, here in Sydney.
Okay. So, yeah, like a wide range, really, and it's about, I guess what it's really at the heart of it is human behaviour. So how do we enhance the way we relate to what's around us, and how do we make that a beautiful or functional experience?
Of course, and also thinking about intergenerational spaces. So one of the really positive outcomes from this year's award winners is that we had lots of projects that actually celebrated youth landscapes or the way that youth use public spaces. And that's really important to make sure that youth have permission to use public space and really just normalise the youth being in the public arena, both socially and culturally.
Okay, well, tell us about some of the projects that were winners this year, and you've just had the awards this week. There were quite a few spaces for young people.
That's right. One of the award winners was a place called Julia Reserve Youth Park, and that's out at Oran Park, which is a new suburban development area in Western Sydney. It's about 2 hectares of a mix of recreation, social and leisure activities. So you've got your skate park, basketball, natural areas for nature plays, seating and barbecues, and it's right at the centre of the new community. So it really is a community asset. Another great place was the Paper Bark Play Space by Phyllis Marler. This was in Parramatta Park, so it's a really thoughtful place that celebrates both the significant Aboriginal and European heritage there in Parramatta Park. And the children here of varied kind of mobilities can interact with this space. It's got a beautiful layered history of the site, and so children can respond to those interpretive components through the exploration of the space.
Mm-hmm. Wow. We're talking here with Sara Padgett Kjaersgaard, who's a landscape architect and also the jury chair of this week's Landscape Architecture Awards in New South Wales. We have also with us one of the winners, the landscape architect Mark Tyrrell, and he's the director of the TYRRELLStudios. Good morning to you, Mark.
Morning.
Are you a Tyrrell or a Tyrrell?
I like to say Tyrrell.
Do you? You're not related to that family, are you?
Oh, I think I am.
Ah, okay. So, from the great wine family of the Hunter Valley.
I was the great book family of Central Sydney.
Tyrrell's books. Okay. Well, there you go. Now, you've won quite a few of these awards, Mark. Tell us how many you won.
Let me count them up. No, I think we won 4 awards, which was a great surprise for us.
Okay, so one of the things that you did, and this particularly fascinates me as a dog lover, and I know cat lovers will be turning their noses up in a sort of cat-like way, but you did design a park specifically to attract and delight dogs. What did you do?
We did. So this was the Shale Hills Dog Park, and it was in collaboration with the Western Sydney Parkland Trust. And so what we tried to do was take what's typically a low budget, often a kind of a leftover space that's left for dogs. And whilst that's appreciated by dog owners, we wanted to see how we could use design to really lift the quality and the experience of the dog park and celebrate that relationship between people and their pets. So we actually brought a dog psychologist and behaviouralist on board, believe it or not, and we asked her, what do dogs want and what do their owners want?
Actually, I've got a little bit of audio of this expert that you brought on board. His name's Ryan Tate. Here he is.
Welcome to Shale Hills Dog Park, a dog park that's brand new and has something for everyone, dogs and humans alike. We have agility courses, small dog areas, scent detection gardens, and obedience areas. We have a strong focus of dog and owner engagement here at this park, encouraging the owners to come with a pouch full of treats, lots of their favourite toys, and get involved in some activities with their canine companion.
That's fantastic. I can imagine myself ending up in the obedience area quite regularly, I think. What goes on there?
Well, so we ended up designing really a course more than an obedience area, and it was this 10 steps of, be with your dog and teach it to sit and give it a treat, and then you move on to the next one. And it was a way of getting people circulating around the landscape with their pets and kind of celebrating that relationship with them. And we also had we had a sensory garden that's this 50-metre long concrete structure with all of the plants that dogs like to smell and brush up against.
Like what? What are they?
They're the sort of just sensory ones that have a good scent, like thyme and rosemary, and also ones with, just interesting textures for the dogs to look at. And that's been a really interesting thing to watch them using that. And then we also we tried to develop just the basic prospect refuge kind of way that dogs use the landscape, and we developed that into this grid of sculptural mounds that have these concrete tops, and then people and their dogs, it's amazing seeing them using them. They'll sort of sit up on top of them, and a dog will sort of survey the landscape and then be down and going through tunnels and all sorts of things like that. So it's kind of taking the dog park to a new level and creating something that's sculptural and exciting for dog owners as well as the dogs.
Well, it's sort of the vision I'm getting forming in my head is a little bit like a very sophisticated mini golf for dogs, but actually it's more like the old adventure playgrounds. Now, I don't know what happened to those, but they were a thing in the 70s, the adventure playgrounds, and maybe too many kids broke their arms, but that was all about acting in the landscape rather than being sent to some brightly coloured swings or something to entertain yourself.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think you think of Zen gardens and you think of these landscapes that can have a really powerful impact on people and how they feel about where they are at that moment in the city. And so we sort of think that good design and simple form making and all of those things can really influence people's enjoyment of space. And as you say, the adventure playground was something that, maybe there were broken arms and things, but it's really coming back with nature play. It's a way that it's now thought of, I think, as a way that you respond to the site conditions. So, we were bringing people into this site on the high point so that they could be in the cooler breezes that in Western Sydney are important. Good vistas, you could just sit at the top if you wanted to just roll out of your car and throw a ball, you could do that. And so it's sort of, design is about taking the best out of the place and really trying to develop it into something that people can engage with.
Gee, it's such a world, isn't it? On our text line, 0467 922 702, David says, landscape architecture, the most underrated profession. They take a flat, bland, bare block and can visualise plant growth 20 years ahead. Sydney Park is a great example, says David in Chippendale. And here's another one from Wald. He says, wonderful to be celebrating the quality of our outdoor spaces, but it can also be frustrating to hear landscape architects attempting to define their work more broadly to include backyards, an area that has its own preferred specialists for owners. I didn't realise this. You probably knew all about this, Mark. Landscape designers are the ones that do backyards. Horticulturalists with higher levels of training in plant material integration and maintenance frequently provide better outcomes for owners. Gee, is there I hate to use the word, but turf war between landscape designers and landscape architects, Mark?
Well, it sounds like there might be. I wasn't aware of it, but I think there possibly is. I mean, it's not quite right. Landscape architecture is a synthetic profession. It works at all scales. So some of the awards were for these beautiful garden landscapes. I think Jane Irwin had one with this stunning lap pool and fantastic plants that she's known for. So she's a landscape architect that can operate at those levels. We work at all these scales. We work at this smaller scale. We don't do backyards and things. So, but the private domain is actually a key contributor to the quality of the urban environment, and to be able to plant trees and grow trees in the private domain as well as in the public domain actually contributes to the ecology of the city as well as urban heat and all those things. So I think there's no point squabbling over professional boundaries. I think it's something that everyone can contribute to.
Yes, and of course all those kind of refuges for wild native animals and birds coming into gardens are fantastic, and frogs and whatever else, brilliant to be doing that. So when you're designing a landscape, I suppose, or a plan for a landscape, what comes first? Do you get given the site and then you go down and stroll around and catch the vibe, or what happens? What's the first thought?
Well, the first thought is yes, we got the project, and because it's quite competitive to get these projects, and then of course we're very grateful to have very good clients. So none of the projects are possible without a good client. And we do have fantastic collaborators and clients with the Government Architect's Office, as well as the Trust and others. So then for us, one of the projects that we've worked on for a long time now in collaboration with Barbara Schaffer from the Government Architect's Office is this Greater Sydney Green Grid, which was one of the awarded projects. And this is something that really helps us to contextualise the landscape that we're going to work with at all sorts of scales. So if you've ever flown over Greater Sydney, you'll likely be able to remember the picture of, the urban footprint and all of these kind of playing fields often lit up at night. all these sort of small open spaces and a lot of urban development. And as that development's occurred in Sydney, a lot of the land that was developed, that could be developed, was developed, and a lot of the open space was swampland or low-lying creeks and things. And so we've ended up with a very fractured kind of disconnected system of open space in Greater Sydney. And so one of the biggest roles that landscape architects can play is reconnecting all of these spaces together. And that's what the Green Grid does, and that's what many of the projects do. So often we look then, whatever site we're working on, we'll look at that wider system. We'll zoom right out to the, 10,000 square kilometres of Greater Sydney. We'll understand the soils, the geologies, the habitats, the microclimates, and then the recreational needs of people, as well as the hydrological systems. And we try and map all of that and then stitch back together that broken mosaic so that open spaces can work as a greater system for Sydney.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, let's go back to Sara Padgett Kjaersgaard. I guess that's a fascinating idea of there being this green grid, Sara. How well does Sydney do this, and what are the things that we're good at?
Well, I think Mark's piece of work is an essential part of how this city continues to develop this in an excellent way, because we've lost so many of these green areas to urbanisation. So it really is an exceptional project. And really what we need to do in the way that Mark has just spoken about is to be able to change scales and then work with our local governments to really identify those key areas that need to be reconnected back in, and then ensure that there's also active transport networks like bicycle paths or walking paths that allow people to move from the places that they live to the areas to socialise and move along those green networks. And we're seeing that to have happen throughout Sydney, but there's still many of these green linked places that need to be reconnected.
Mm-hmm. So you've got the great job of walking to the places that have been nominated for the awards and sort of inspecting them. What are you looking for when you go to one? Is it a sort of shock and awe feeling, or what is it?
Well, we have three criteria. It's thinking, leadership and results. So we're really looking for innovation in the thinking. We're looking for leadership, and particularly Mark's work here is about influencing new stakeholders like the state government, like local government organisations to come on board with this green grid idea. And then we're looking for results. So many of our projects, and particularly in one of our new categories this year, the health and education landscapes category, we had some great results about the impacts of new schools on children and the way children use those spaces. So that's the criteria, and I'm really lucky to have two little young boys, and so I get the joy of also experiencing these spaces through those young eyes, which really helps me look at the world in a different way. Yeah,
it really does. When you see what actions they're inspired to take, then you can really read the landscape differently. Wow, fantastic. What a great profession you both work in, and what a delight to talk to you. Thank you so much for being here. Just finally, actually, Mark, someone here and says, any Tom, Dick or Harry can call themselves a landscaper, and they've spelled it with an A on the end. Landscape architects have university degrees and more. And I happen to know, actually, Mark, you've got three. You've got 3 degrees, architect, urban designer, and you're a landscape architect. So there you go. Congratulations on your 4 wins, and no doubt we'll be seeing more of your work and interacting with it. Yeah, fantastic. Mark Tyrrell, landscape architect and director of TYRRELLStudio, and Sara Padgett Kjaersgaard, who is also a landscape architect, and she was the jury chair of the recent New South Wales Landscape Architecture Awards.